Hello, I'm Terrence McNally. Welcome to Freeform, a world that just might work. And I'm going to be speaking today with ARLIE HOCHSCHILD, Professor Emerita of Sociology at UC Berkeley and author of the insightful and powerful Strangers in Their Own Land, which we've talked about previously on this show a couple of times. And today, we're going to talk about her new book, Stolen Pride, Loss, Shame, and the Rise of the Right. On Freeform, we explore the lives, the work, the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at politics, economics, environment, science, health, culture, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. The show streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn.com. Podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net. TerrenceMcNally, Terrence McNally, all one word, .net. Soon after the 2016 election, I discovered this quote from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, most famous for writing The Little Prince. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. Now, that day, now nearly 8 years ago, I wrote the following. So this is soon after the 2016 election. Passion to return to a simpler past drove enough voters to the polls in swing states to decide the 2016 presidential election. How can we engage their emotions in a more positive, forward-looking, or progressive direction? Can we generate a vision of a future that is as welcome, compelling, inviting, and real as the past some fondly remember? And I spoke about this with today's guest, ARLIE Russell Hochschild, in early 2018, a year into the Trump presidency, and again in 2021 after his defeat in 2020. Hochschild is Professor Emerita of Sociology at the University of California, Berkeley, as I said, and for over 30 years, her inventive, provocative, and useful insights about contemporary work and family life have grown out of her research. She's long focused on the human emotions which underlie our moral beliefs, practices, and social lives, and is known as the founder of the sociology of emotion. Hochschild is the author of several books, including Second Shift, The Time Bind, and The Outsourced Self. And at the core of her 2016 book, Strangers in Their Own Land, Anger and Mourning on the American Right, is the power of a deep story. After 5 years talking with folks in Southern Louisiana, Hochschild sensed that a particular deep story they share is what holds their political contradictions together. She has continued her work of deep listening to folks, especially white folks in rural America, who feel their way of life has been lost. As soon as I learned she'd written a new book, I got in touch to set up today's conversation. And in her new book, Stolen Pride, she takes readers to Pike County, Kentucky, in the nation's whitest and second poorest congressional district, where coal jobs had disappeared and a deadly drug crisis had arrived when she began talking with residents in 2017. Also, there happened to be a white nationalist march on its way to town, a rehearsal for the deadly Unite the Right march soon to take place in Charlottesville, Virginia. Once at the political center of the country, the district that she's ensconced herself in voted 80% for Donald Trump in both 2016 and 2020. And in this new book, Hochschild asks why this big shift took place. For a full answer, she looks again at the intersection of jobs, culture, and emotion, and offers a lens on the relationship between politics, shame, and pride. Now, as I was preparing for today's show, I found myself thinking about other books I've read and folks I've spoken with that deal with some of the same issues. So before bringing ARLIE in today's conversation, I'm going to offer listeners a few other resources to dig deeper into the questions, the realities, and the challenges that she and I will talk about for the rest of the hour. Listeners, get ready to take some notes. If you want me to send you this mini reading list, email me at TEMcNally, TEMCNALLY @mac.com. Podcasts with all of these are available at most major podcast sites. You can look for Freeform or Terrence McNally and they're all at my site, terencemcnally.net. First, Michelle Wild Anderson, professor at Stanford Law School and Stanford School of Sustainability. She's the author of The Fight to Save the Town, Reimagining Discarded America. Decades of cuts to local government amidst rising concentrations of poverty have wreaked havoc on communities left behind by the modern economy, very much like the spaces where ARLIE Russell Hochschild does her work. These people now find themselves caught in negative spirals. Coming back from these blows gets harder and harder, but it is not impossible. And what Anderson does is she writes about 4 communities who are on their way back: Stockton, California, Lawrence, Massachusetts, Josephine County in Southern Oregon, and Detroit, Michigan. I talked with George Packer a few weeks ago about his cover story in The Atlantic on Phoenix, Arizona, what will become of American civilization, conspiracism and hyperpartisanship in the nation's fastest growing city. And one idea that runs through his article and has resonance far beyond Phoenix or far beyond the issues of water is that the cultivation of partisan polarization by political parties and players and by the media to their benefits in terms of power, influence, and dollars is the roadblock that chokes our ability to talk to each other and even begin to solve any of the critical problems we face. As Packer points out, where we used to have competing interests, now we have enemies. In their 2020 book, Tightrope, America Reaching for Hope, Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Wu Dunn, his wife, tell their story in part through the lives of some of the children with whom Kristof grew up in rural Yamhill, Oregon, an area that prospered for much of the 20th century but has been devastated in the last few decades as blue-collar jobs disappeared. About 1/4 of the children on Kristof's old school bus died in adulthood from drugs, alcohol, suicide, or reckless accidents. They ask what policies produced our gross inequality and our tribal divisions, and what policies might help us heal. And finally, they deal with the power of narrative and the need for a new American story to replace the up by your bootstraps, you're on your own narrative with one that recognizes that the people of our nation need each other. Kristof and Wu Dunn acknowledge their debt to Nobel Prize-winning economist Angus Deaton and his wife, economist Ann Case, who wrote the best-selling book that introduced the notion of deaths of despair, as an explanation for their shocking realization that life expectancy in the U.S. was falling, due in large part to alcoholism, drug overdoses, and suicides. Award-winning journalist Mary O'Hara grew up in deep poverty in Belfast, Northern Ireland during the Troubles. In her 2020 book, The Shame Game, Overturning the Toxic Poverty Narrative, the one that tells you your poverty is your own fault, she writes of the power of that narrative to rationalize and excuse otherwise cruel and unjust treatment of our most vulnerable neighbors. Filmmaker, writer, and political organizer Astra Taylor has released 2 books within the past year. The first, co-authored with Leah Hunt Hendricks, is Solidarity, the Past, Present, and Future of a World-Changing Idea, something that they make very clear we need more of. And the second, The Age of Insecurity, which is Taylor alone on that one, in which she points out that in its bones, capitalism is an insecurity-producing machine. She believes seemingly disparate crisis, rising inequality, declining mental health, ecological emergency, the threat of authoritarianism, all originate from this social order that is built on insecurity. And finally, Chloe Maxman, M-A-X-M-I-N. Chloe Maxman, at 28, after one term in the House of Representatives of the state of Maine, defeated the incumbent minority leader to move to the state Senate in a rural Republican district. She and her campaign manager, Canyon Woodward, wrote Dirt Road Revival to tell the stories of their winning elections in rural Maine, as well as the lessons they learned to guide other rural progressives. They say we dig into the local, cultivating relationships and utilizing the resourcefulness of our rural communities to build a rooted movement. We see that rural America is alive and beautiful, eager to be heard and remembered. Okay. Now to today's conversation. ARLIE Russell Hochschild, Professor Emeritus of Sociology, University of Berkeley, as I said, is the author of groundbreaking books, and the last two being The Strangers in Their Own Land and the one we're talking about today, Stolen Pride. Welcome again, Arlie Hochschild, to Freeform, a world that just might work.
Thank you.
And let me tell listeners, we're recording this conversation Wednesday, August 14th. As you may recall, I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas we talk about. So, as you have before, but it's been a few years, how do you see your path to the work you're engaged in these days? You know, how did you choose sociology? How did you choose the emotions that you track in sociology and the work you're doing now in rural America?
Well,
big question,
a large question.
Take as much as, bite off as much as you want.
I really like to get to know people and hear stories. And I learn what I learn about the world by listening to people tell stories about their lives. It's my joy in life to do that. And in the last two books, I've been looking at and haunted by the question of why people that used to see solutions and a vision of the future in the Democratic Party have switched over to the Republican Party, and that the people who are in trouble and need help are turning to people like Donald Trump. Why is this happening? And what I have done in both my last book, Strangers in Their Own Land, and the current book, Stolen Pride, is to take off my own political alarm system and get to know people in a community and learn an answer to the question by listening. So what I have done in this book is to go to Pike County, Kentucky, which is, as you said, in the whitest and second poorest congressional district in the country. And it used to be, it is an area of where coal jobs have gone, opiate crisis has come in. And in 2017, a neo-Nazi march came to town in Pikeville, Kentucky. And I thought, oh no, this is a perfect storm. Let me stop and get to know people, get to know the city protectors who were trying to stop harm from coming, because word had come that there would be thousands of right-wing marchers, KKK, and neo-Nazis, and League of the South, all these different groups. And so I wanted to talk to the city fathers.
So let me ask you quickly, had you chosen the town before you heard about the march, or were you kind of circling, looking for a place in Appalachia, and when you heard about the march, chose this one?
The second.
Okay.
And so I did a Rashomon. Who's trying to protect the town? Who is the guy that's leading the group that, could bring violence to the town? Who are the vulnerable people, African Americans? There was a Holocaust survivor and an imam that had a small mosque in the area. They all felt threatened. So who are the potential victims of this? And then I wanted to look at the faces in the crowd. Who are the people? Who are there? What's a random sample of people, and how did they see what's going on in their town? What are the needs, and how do they view white nationalism? Does that look like an answer to them or a threat? And it at the end of of this Rashomon, looking at all parties of this event, I look at what happened in the march, and no spoilers here, but
yeah, I was going to say we don't have to hold people in suspense. What did happen at the march? Yeah.
oh well, I like holding people in
Okay.
suspense. Um, but now that we're bringing it up, actually, the people said, no, we're not in favor of white nationalism. Nothing like it. You know, my granddad fought in World War II and against the Nazis. We don't want that here.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's a menace and a bad idea. So run it out. But it turned out that it was the practice run
Right.
for Charlottesville, which took place only months later.
Right. And one thing that you learned in that investigation is echoed, I think, in Christoph and Wu Dun's book. It's definitely echoed in George Packer's article about Phoenix that was the recent cover in Atlantic, that when you get below the headlines and below the yelling, that not that, I mean, there is a percentage that is so angry and so frustrated and prone to violence and prone to, all of this, the intense negativity, but that they are really a minority, even the places that we might think of where they're at home.
Right. What's portrayed on the mass media are angry faces.
Yes.
And I think what we have to do is back up from anger. First of all, to look at how people are feeling and not to say, oh, crazy person to be showing emotions. No, but say, no, we all feel feelings, but there are reasons for our feelings. There's even what you could call a logic to our feelings, that they are in response to something. And what I have put forward is the idea that the anger you see is in response to a shame that downwardly mobile non-college whites feel about loss. And I think the people I came to know have felt loss of three kinds. First of all, there's absolute loss. They had coal jobs, well paid, dangerous, and they lost them. So that's an absolute loss. And these are people who live in mountains and in tight communities, and it's a one commodity,
Mm-hmm.
one industry place. So with those good jobs gone and no good jobs coming in, you have to leave. So the real categories got to be not so much, what class are you, what race are you, what gender are you, but are you a leaver or a stayer?
Right.
And so many people had to leave their homes, but it was said, look, it's hard to leave if you don't have money and contacts or a BA. And a lot of people had none of those. So leaving was not easy. And often they came back empty-handed.
Mm.
So that was kind of the scene, that there wasn't a new alternative coming in. They felt kind of stuck. And so one loss was of jobs. Another loss was a loss of the value of what you knew. It was a devaluation of your knowledge. You still had that knowledge of inside a mine, let's say. It's very complicated how to avoid danger and what the tunnels look like, and it's a lot of technical knowledge, but it's of no use now. So that's the second kind of loss. And
one thing that you say is you think that the very meaning of pride has a lot to do with being of use, being of value.
That's right. And there is a loss of the sense of being of use and being of value. So, and these are historically very proud people. Mm-hmm. So that's a big loss. And the third kind of loss is relative loss. You notice that actually people in red states are doing, like their states are doing worse, but people in blue states or people in the cities are doing better. So you've got those three kinds of loss. And then that loss can turn into shame. And how does that work? I got very interested in the Protestant ethic. That is this feeling that if you work hard and you succeed, pride is yours. Good for you. You did it, you know? But if you fail, you didn't work hard enough, and the shame is yours. So I found a kind of a pride paradox. On the one hand, you have people who feel that are in really down and out, downwardly mobile situations. You know, there's been an economic bust and they're suffering from it. And those turn out to be the same people who have a very old-fashioned, hard, strict notion of individual achievement. So those are people who are forced into failure, but who blame themselves for that failure. And what's paradoxical is that people in blue states, where there's more upward mobility, better economic luck, have a different culture of pride, one in which if you succeed, okay, but you're looking at circumstances that caused that. And if you fail, okay, but you're looking at circumstances that caused that failure. So the irony is that the people who are in the toughest economy are hardest on themselves, and the people in the luckiest economies are less hard on themselves. And if you look at attitudes of Democrats and Republicans, they're very different. Mm-hmm. And so that's the people who are stuck in this pride paradox are shamed. They are downwardly mobile and they blame themselves. And then, of course, the epithets fly on Facebook and the internet, and people feel dissed as dumb hillbillies. So, and they think the left and Democrats are doing the shaming. So that's on top. That gets exaggerated by the right-wing media. So there's a shame situation here. And the argument of my book is that shame itself can become like a political ore. It can be like coal itself. It can be excavated and exploited by such people as Donald Trump, who I think is a master at digging into and speaking to this socially produced shame, this unwarranted shame. And I argue that he has done this in a way that's hidden in plain sight. Almost.
Tell you what, we'll break down his methodology in a moment, but you've obviously triggered a few other thoughts and questions for me. Okay. So one is the very I'm going backwards, but we'll pick up again. One is that emotion is a very key part of your research, your analysis. And as I said, you're considered perhaps the originator of the sociology of emotion. When you began to see that and think that was important and hone in on that, how we're going back quite a while to some of your first research and first books. How out of the ordinary was that for you to focus on emotion rather than just on data and facts and that sort of thing?
Yes, of course. Emotional realities are facts too. But yes, I think that in the 1970s, when I began to really seriously think about emotions, that it was considered irrational to focus on the irrational.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, quite the opposite. And it also, there was a misconception that if you were interested in emotions, that meant you weren't interested in economic conditions, that it was either or.
Right.
Well, that is a profound mistake, that no one who really takes emotions seriously is saying economics aren't basic and hugely important. What I and others are saying is economics it's an incomplete explanation for
Excellent.
what we're
Excellent.
finding.
Yes. Right.
And that's certainly true of the story I tell in Stolen Pride.
And I would say also in Stranger in Their Own Land, and probably going back to some of the early books about how people were trying to balance work in their lives. But so that to me is a crucial thing, that what you see is a job or the loss of a job, an income or the loss of an income, status or the loss of status, and now we're getting into emotions. And to think that you can answer the question with either of those by themselves or actually even grasp what's going on without seeing that it's that interaction within each of these people that makes the difference. The other thing that you say is that emotions like shame, like pride, are very much social emotions.
Yes, that's right. I feel that pride and shame are like the skin of the self. It's how we perceive others perceive us.
Oh, God, yes.
And our feelings about that. It's hugely important. It is our social self. And so it's the most connected it's the most available to be influenced by political rhetoric. And so, yes, that's the very nexus that I went for.
Right.
And
I love that fact that it is our sense of what we suspect, believe, fear is others' sense of us.
Right. It's not guilt, where it's your own judgment about yourself that you have feelings about. You're blaming yourself. Is the world blaming me? Right. How does the world see me? How do I feel about how the world sees me?
And my guess is that listeners hearing that go, of course, I can remember as a 5-year-old, as a 20-year-old, as a 30-year-old, the moments where my negative feelings toward myself were based on my assumption of others' negative feelings about myself.
That's right. That's right. Very important. For all of us, who likes to be shamed? Show me one person. Nobody.
That's right. And if you weren't, I don't know if you were familiar with the Mary O'Hara book about shame.
No, I've just made notes of it.
Yeah. You will, as I say, she grew up in the poverty that, akin to what you're talking about, only it had the added thing of the violence of the Troubles at the time in Northern Ireland. And to realize, that there were no bootstraps.
Yes.
That whole thing was a myth to keep her disempowered and alone, and so on. I think you will find that moving. Now, one thing that I think is obvious from what you've said so far, but I just want to reinforce it, is I approach this as picking up the conversation we began in 2018 and picked up again in 2021, and see these two books as companion works in an ongoing project. I assume you see the same. And the one thing I would like you to take a little detour, because I think it would be helpful for people who are new to your work, and tell them, I alluded to it at first, in Strangers in Their Own Land, really the key thing here is that people are telling themselves a deep story. And it's not a literal story. It's a metaphorical, almost a dreamlike story. But I think it will be helpful to people to understand, what your last project taught you, and then you move to this next one. Before you do that, let me just tell people that you're listening to Free Forum, A World That Just Might Work. I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking with ARLIE HOCHSCHILD. She's a professor emerita of sociology at UC Berkeley, author of many books, the last two of which are Stranger in Their Own Land, which we're going back to at this moment, and then the one we're focusing on today, Stolen Pride, Loss, Shame, and the Rise of the Right. So, as I said, one of the key things in Strangers in Their Own Land is that you kind of dug around and said, I think there's a deep story underlying people's feelings and responses.
That's right. That's right. So what is a deep story? A deep story is, we all have a deep story underneath our politics. So there's a right-wing deep story and a left-wing deep story. But the one that interested me and that I really wanted to find out about was the deep story of the right. And a deep story is a story that feels true. It's not a story about facts. It's not a story about moral precepts. It's how your politics, your view of the world, and the politics connected to that view, how it feels. And in Strangers in Their Own Land, the people around Southern Louisiana that I talked to.
And you spent 5 years or parts of 5 years getting to know these people and talking to these people to discern and pull out this story.
Yes, quite wonderful people. Many of them connected to the oil industry there, and deeply religious, and it turned out to be great fans of and followers of Donald Trump. And so I wanted to find out, why and how. And so the deep story of the far right in Louisiana, and also true in Appalachia, is that you're waiting in line, and imagine yourself facing a long line that leads up to the American dream that's hidden behind a mountain, and you're waiting to move up in line and get there. And your feet are tired, and the line has not moved. One man told me, I haven't had a raise in a decade. You don't look behind you, and there are far more people behind you. You don't look behind. You just look ahead, who's ahead of you. And in a moment in this right-wing deep story, you see somebody cutting in line ahead of you. And who is that? That would be a woman who, through affirmative action, was given a position, or it would be a Black, or after that, it would be an immigrant, or it would be a refugee, or it would be a well-paid public servant. All these people seem to be cutting in line as you feel it. And then another moment of the right-wing deep story, there's Barack Obama, or Democratic president, who seems to be beckoning to those who are cutting in line and saying, "Oh, I'm helping you. I'm not helping the other line waiters. I'm helping you." And then, so you feel, oh, wait a minute, I'm cut out. He's not representing me. He's representing these line cutters. And in a final moment of the right-wing deep story, there's someone ahead of you who in line, who's more educated, has a higher position, earning more, who turns around and says, "You ignorant, racist, redneck.
Or an Appalachia hillbilly, right?
Exactly. And you just feel that's it. That's it. I'm just insulted. There's no place for me here.
Yeah. Yep. So what we were talking about before was that there were some realities about that, right? And we were focusing on Appalachia, but the same was true of Southern Louisiana, that the jobs were disappearing. The potential to live the life your parents lived was shrinking. But then there's this deep story that puts it all together for you. And that's a great contributor to what triggers your emotions.
That's right. So I went to people, I sort of made up the story after listening to people a lot and said, okay, this is, and then I went back to them, hey, there's this deep story. What do you think? Does it speak to you? And one man said, oh, I live your story. Mm-hmm. Another said, you read my mind. Another said, no, you're missing things. The people that are cutting in line are using the taxes that I pay. And another said, oh, we just get out of line. We just secede to the South. So, yeah, people had feelings about that sort of core story. Fit their feelings.
It bred them. It bred them.
Just one chapter of the story.
Yeah, it bred the feelings and kind of supported them. So let me jump in for one question, which is that in the new book, you focus on pride and shame and kind of how that transforms into other emotions and political realities and so on. Was there a key? I was trying to remember. Was there a key emotion in Strangers in Their Own Land, or was it basically anger?
Yeah, well, to continue a new chapter of the deep story, when Donald Trump came to Appalachia and promised to bring coal back and build a wall, keep competitors out. In a way, there was a second chapter to the deep story focused on him. And one man explained, well, you're waiting in line. And then there's this bully that gets into line, and he's directing traffic, who gets to go ahead to the American dream and who has to stay back. And he's a bad bully. But then there's a second bully, and that bully is not perfect. He's mean, but he's our bully.
Right.
So in this chapter of the deep story, there's violence, there's accusation, there's bitterness, there's a fight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, now we'll jump back to Appalachia and go back to one thing you were saying before, which was that the what you were talking about when you're talking about the paradox, the pride and shame paradox there, what was that not only does the Appalachian, the Kentuckian where you're embedded with and talking to, have few prospects if he stays home, but he has a different culture that makes him blame himself for his circumstances. You were contrasting him with the person, and I'm gonna quote one of your folks. He says the white middle class can say, "Hey, I've worked hard and done well." The black poor can say, "I've worked hard and not done well, but I've been held back by racism." But he said, that leaves me out. I have, and I'm putting it in air quotes, white privilege, but I'm still poor. So I must be less than nothing. And that person, this is Maynard, I forget his first name. He feels that neither party offers voters like him a way of thinking about his dignity, that Republicans talk about tax cuts and retribution. Democrats focus on gender, race, and sexuality, and no one is speaking to him or representing him. And that seemed to me to be a very sad moment in your story.
Yes, there is definitely a feeling of being trapped in a bubble of invisibility that you just don't feel you can tell your story and be heard with empathy. There was almost what I would call empathy envy, like, who's going to listen to me? I'm going to get blamed for being lazy and being on food stamps and not making it if I'm white and privileged and still poor. I have no explanation for myself that would make a person see anything admirable in me. That was the feeling.
And what's interesting there's a lot of things that are interesting, but one is that there are circumstances that are way beyond his control or anyone in that holler's control, like globalization, like automation, just to pick two. And yet, because of the culture of individualism and bootstraps and all of that, he can't even allow those to salve his wounds.
Exactly. What's really going on is natural gas got cheaper than coal. And the coal mines that continued became deeply automated. They turned to removing mountaintops, some 50 in Kentucky alone. That can be done with a humongous machine run by one man and geared by one engineer. You don't need a lot of coal miners to take the top of a mountain off. And then there's better coal in Wyoming. So these are external causes for the loss of your job. You're not responsible for that, but you're being saddled with that emotionally because of an ideology of individualism that's stronger among Republicans, rural whites, and a lot of
and it has to do,
Irish,
as you point out, in Appalachia, I think Southern Louisiana, a little different ethnic mix, but Appalachia, Scottish, Irish, English, pride and in hard work and that sort of thing is, backbone, all of that kind of stuff, muddle through. It's, it seems to me it's a particularly tough culture on oneself.
Yes, that's right. And, I have spent a lifetime teaching sociology. You could say that, in a way, much of the kind of courses that you learn in sociology is, wait a minute, there are other logics. There's capitalism, there's racism, there's gender politics. There are many things that aren't your own sweat of the brow that do affect your fate.
Right. But as you also have pointed out, is the more you believe that, the more, and as you said, the combination of the losses you've suffered and the shame you feel
Right.
is or for the demagogue. You know, one thing that I'm always reminded of, that I only learned when I spoke with Astra Taylor, who was one of the people I mentioned earlier, in a book that she had a documentary called "What is Democracy," and a book called "We May Not Have Democracy, but you'll miss it when it's gone," or something like that. It was very close to that. But she pointed out, what she said was Plato's dilemma about democracy, which was new to me, which is that democracy will inevitably lead to tyranny. And his reasoning was that when you have democracy, the rich and their greed will be unstoppable. And at a certain point, a demagogue will appear who appeals to the loss of the others. And that by its very freedom and allowing the rich and greedy to dominate, it brings its own destruction. And it's been something, you know, to really observe over the last few years. Now, let's talk about how I think it is instructive, given that he is still the candidate for president. You have a 5-move sort of analysis of Trump's transformation of their loss to his gain.
Yes. And I call it a shame reductive ritual.
A ritual that he has perfected, although it seems almost instinctively. But go ahead.
We hear it all the time without thinking of it this way. Many people look at the far right, at MAGA, and they just are baffled, scratch their heads. How could this be? You know, are these people stupid? Are they crazy? I hear this, you know, I'm so different. You know, this could never happen to me. There's no emotional logic here. There's no circumstance that would make a normal, intelligent person be a MAGA follower. And what I'm saying is, you've got decent, intelligent, good people, but who have been drawn into a kind of emotional logic that is being played upon by a charismatic leader, in this case, Donald Trump. And I think we're exposed to this 5-part ritual without noticing it. And I think it goes like this. Moment one, Donald Trump will say something transgressive. He'll say, Mexicans crossing illegally over the border are rapists. Or he'll say, immigrants are poisoning the blood of America, something transgressive. That's moment one. Moment two, the punditry shames Donald Trump. It says, what? You can't say that. That's terrible that you said that. What's wrong with you that you say such an unpatriotic, un-American thing? And mainly it's 1 and 2 that people on the liberal left listen to. 1 and 2. Transgression and punishment, shaming.
Of Trump.
Yes, of Trump. Moment 3, Trump announces himself as the victim of the media's shaming. Look what they're saying about me. Oh, this is terrible. Look what the government's done. Look, I'm a victim. It hurts to be a victim. In moment 3, he's announcing himself as in pain. And an extension of 3, he's saying, I'm in pain for you.
Right.
Right? Something religious there. So that's moment 3. moment 4 is the big one. And it's the roar back, because then Donald Trump roars back at the shamers. He will not be a victim. He will not permit anyone else to be the victim of shame. He will punish the shamers. And he will begin with his insults. It's been called kind of insult politics. It's what is insults? It's shaming. And he's so will tell us that he's the victim of the treasonous press, the deep state.
The Justice Department, what he calls lawfare instead of warfare. He calls it lawfare, that Biden has orchestrated all of these cases, all of these trials.
Exactly. Of which he and his followers are victims. So he is the heroic defender against the shame. And that goes on as 4, but recently in this last year, it's extended into a full-scale moment 5, in which he is announcing a full-scale takeover and revenge, retribution. Right. And from day one, we don't need the Electoral College. We don't need the voting box.
I'll be dictator for a day.
That's right. In service of the shamed, he will be the heroic restorer of a different order where it's reversed. The shamed shall be proud. So it's scary where the emotional logic that turns shame to blame and blame to retribution. Mm-hmm. It's a logic, the first part of which the left looks at, and the last part of which the right looks at. And I just think, what we have to do in the months between now and the election is alert ourselves to the importance of this emotional hold. It's not that people are those who are MAGA and great believers in Trump are any different from you or me, but they've been into a different part of American culture and American society. They've gone through something different, and they've been subjected to a kind of a cultural shaping of feeling in, I think, a dangerous direction that's not too different from the shamed Germans, for example, after
Between World War I and II.
That's right. So there's a larger emotional logic at work, which we need to add to our understanding of economic reality.
Right. Almost that same thing we said at the top when we said how sociology used to think that you had to choose between economics and feelings. To some extent, progressives, Democratic Party, red, blue folks, whatever the current campaigns have to recognize the emotions and not just go, but look at my policy. Right. And let me just say, by the way, that I worked for years helping organizations with communications, foundations, nonprofits, etc., companies. And in my presentation, I would single out one slide and I would say, that's the most important one there. It's the foundation of everything else. And it will work not just in your office, but in your relationships with your children. And it says, human beings want more than anything else to feel seen and heard. Yes.
That's great. It's really true.
One thing you quoted, because I was going to say, well, how do they deal with Trump's lies? You talked about he's imperfect, and you point out that watching television in a clinic one day, a man said he saw Donald Trump promising to bring back coal, and he tells you I knew he was lying, but I felt like he saw who I was.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
So your advice, we've got I'll give you 2 minutes. Your advice to those who want to save us from 4 more years of Donald Trump is?
And what?
Your advice to those who want to save us from 4 more years of Donald Trump.
Get yourself into a swing state and prepare yourself to talk to people you don't agree with. Be prepared to learn a lot and to enjoy learning a lot. And talk, if you can, to independents and undecideds. And that's a third of voters, incidentally.
And my guess is becoming even more, right? In other words, I do feel like part of what this phenomenon of the Harris Waltz I call it the relaunch of the campaign, is that there were people who weren't loving the idea of voting for Trump.
No, that's right. That's right. But they don't want to be dissed and dismissed and
they didn't think, and they didn't see Biden. I mean, the strength, in quotes, of Trump meant something to them, and what appeared to be the weakness of Biden was just not cutting it for them.
Yes, that's right.
So I think in addition to that, the ones who 6 months ago we considered undecideds or swing voters, I think that group is larger than it was then, because there's the whiff of possibility that, this chapter might be over.
That's right. So what you're saying is there are more people that would be open to listening. And there's an ironic, sad finding about conversations across the political divide. It's been found that actually liberal leftists are more likely to break off a conversation or a relationship if somebody doesn't agree with them than are conservative Republicans. And whites are more likely to do it than blacks. So think about the kind of rigidity involved in that. The people are feeling rigid, they're feeling a little afraid. So what we have to do is relax, be less afraid, and more open to talking to people that don't agree with you. It's also been found that actually people on the right are more likely to be influenced if someone sits down and talks to them face to face than are people on the left. So the very thing that the left is reluctant to do, the right needs. So
and are more
paradox.
open to than you imagine. We gotta bring it to a close. This is always, as I said, this is like picking up a conversation from 3 years ago and from 5 years ago. And I look forward to doing it again. Again, the website is berkeley.edu, and then you just search for ARLIE HOCHSCHILD, and HOCHSCHILD is HOCHS, and then child, HOCHSCHILD. The new book is Stolen Pride, Loss, Shame, and the Rise of the Right. For this conversation, many other interviews and articles, to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to TerenceMcNally.net, TerenceMcNally.net, or a world that just might work.com, to the same website. If you want to get my weekly announcement telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and usually links to 10 or 15 articles to flesh out the conversation, email me at TeMcNally, TeMcNally @mac.com. And you'll find years of podcasts at my site and at most major podcast sites. Michael Lewis, Jeremy Scahill, Naomi Klein, Robert Reich, Van Jones. You can also follow me on Twitter at McNally Terrence. Thanks to Kiana Williams in production, George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all you, My listeners, please share this podcast widely. And finally, Arlie, Russell, Hochschild, keep up your good work.
Thank you.
Thank you.